introduction. Next slide, please, Jessica. So welcome to today's webinar. I just wanted to share a little bit about NARUC before we get started. My name is Kira Zeidelman. I'm a technical director with the Center for Partnerships and Innovation at NARUC. NARUC has been around since 1889. We represent the state public service commissions in all 50 states, District of Columbia, and U.S. territories. Next slide. In my office, the Center for Partnerships and Innovation, we are funded by cooperative agreements with the U.S. Department of Energy and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and we provide resources and trainings to assist state commissions with complex issues. And we work across generation, transmission, distribution, customers, and critical infrastructure preparedness, response, and resilience. And some of our upcoming events that I just wanted to share with everyone, we can put the link to our website in the chat where you can register for all of these, but we have a number of virtual workshops coming up in March and April. The next in our monthly innovation webinar series will be on electric school buses on April 25th. And we also have a number of in-person events coming up. Cybersecurity training, a couple of site visits under our nuclear and coal programs, a renewable energy site visit in Indianapolis, and an energy equity workshop in Washington, D.C. in May. And we'll post the link to our events calendar, and you can feel free to find more information, including registration for those events. So now I'll pass things over to Commissioner Bonnie Suchman with the Maryland Public Service Commission, and she will get us into today's topic.
Okay, well, that's great. Welcome, everyone. I understand we have a little over 80 people, which is a lot of people, and that's great that you're interested in this issue. When they asked me to moderate the panel, I looked at the title of the panel and thought, oh my goodness, this is a lot of issues that we could address, and we could probably do this for a couple of days. And so I'm not going to sort of suggest people, get all the food you need and pull up a couple of blankets, because we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. But it does sort of present opportunities for us to think about what that means. What does consumer choice mean? And you're sort of looking at traditional utility service. And if you think about it as sort of an alternative, I think on some level you kind of miss the boat, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is that the lights stay on, and that the lights stay on in a way that is affordable for everyone. For many years, we had the sort of a very similar paradigm in terms of how generation was generated and how it was provided to customers. But things are changing, and when we think about consumer choice, at least I think about the ways in which the consumer can be part of the solution. So, if we're thinking sort of forward thinking about how we deal with issues around climate change and around affordability and sustainability, it's no longer the burden is no longer on the utility. It's really on a number of players, including the consumer. And so that's, I think, what we're going to be talking about today for an hour. Again, we could talk about this for many hours, but we'll limit ourselves to an hour. And we have three very distinguished panelists today who are going to be talking through these issues, and then presumably we'll have some time for questions. And so I invite folks to submit those questions. First, we'll be hearing from Travis Kavulla, who is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for NRG. After Travis, we'll hear from Allison Bates-Wanop, who is Policy Director for DER Task Force. And then finally, we'll hear from Aaron August, who's the Senior Vice President, Chief Customer and Transformation Officer at Puget Sound Energy. So Travis, why don't you start us off?
Thank you so much, Commissioner Suchman. It's great to be with you today. Always good to participate with NARUC in their informational webinars and other programming. NRG, for those of you who don't know, is a competitive supplier of electricity and gas products to end-use consumers, everyone from large industrial customers to retail customers. We also run a demand response business and own power plants. But really the core of our business is our service to our 8 million end-use customers for energy and energy services. All of those customers relevant to the topic of this panel have chosen to do business with us with very few limited exceptions where we're a provider of last resort in certain markets like Texas and Alberta. If we go to the next slide, I thought I'd just take the opportunity to give a general overview of the kind of buckets of choice that we're talking about on the webinar today. In the first bucket, sort of classical retail competition, customers have been able to choose their own energy provider in certain states since the early 2000s. Those suppliers then become, once they're chosen, fully responsible for providing energy supply service, and they substitute for the incumbent supplier. Those suppliers are obligated to buy capacity to ensure everything adds up to reliability where capacity markets exist, like in the PJM, NYISO, and ISO New England states. And those suppliers are also obligated either to purchase transmission or to charge their customers for transmission service if it remains with the incumbent utility. The second bucket we can talk about, and Allison will do a great job with this, I know, is where a customer has an energy supplier, oftentimes the incumbent utility, sometimes a competitive retailer like NRG, but separately they have a relationship with an aggregator. And the aggregator takes the capabilities of a customer to flex his or her demand or to supply services to the grid through batteries or on-site generation. And then the aggregator bids that aggregation into RTO markets to capture its capacity and energy value, or it sells the aggregation's capabilities to a local utility program for compensation. And the compensation, either coming from the RTO or through the utility, is then shared in some manner with the customer. And finally, the third bucket, and Aaron will talk to this, even in places where the utility sector remains a retail monopoly, there are a growing number of rates and tariffs that offer customers a limited choice within the confines of that monopoly. So I'll spend most of my time, if we turn to the next slide and the slide after that, on the first bucket. I'll hit lightly on the next two buckets, and then I'll turn things over to Allison. So this map represents where customers have a choice. The states in green offer choice to all customer classes, including residential customers. Meanwhile, the states in red offer it either only to commercial and industrial customers or have a cap on enrollments in the program. Just to ballpark some figures for you here, in MACRC, for those of you familiar with the NARUC regions, MACRC is the Mid-Atlantic region that stretches from New York to Virginia and out to Kentucky. About 55% of all energy in MACRC states is served by competitive suppliers and not by the incumbent utility. That figure is lower if you're just talking about residential customers. Only about 1/5 of residential customers in the Mid-Atlantic market are supplied by a competitive retailer. In Texas, that number is basically 100%. There's a provider of last resort in certain utility service territories in Texas, which includes NRG. We provide that polar service, but nearly all residential customers make an active choice of electricity supplier. The jurisdictions that have adopted competitive retail choice have sort of remained fixed, but there is momentum in certain areas. The most recent market to open just earlier this year was the city of Lubbock, a municipal utility with about 100,000 meters. It decided to demonopolize its supply service and opened its service territory to retail competition. And it's a very interesting case because 65% of all eligible customers made an affirmative selection of a retailer in a 6-week shopping window, with only 1/3 of customers defaulted to the default suppliers. So I think customers, when they're presented with shopping options, do care about it and they do participate. But customers in many of the legacy retail states sometimes don't have a very good framework in which to make an informed and active decision about shopping. Meanwhile, probably the most notable policy development in this space is relevant to where you see crosshatches on the states. That indicates the presence of municipal aggregation or community choice programs. In those situations, cities and counties are able to aggregate residential and small commercial customers and enroll them in a supplier selected through a procurement process run by the locality. These programs are opt-out, so the city makes the decision for you and then enrolls you in that alternative supply. You can opt out back to the incumbent utility. This allows for some limited product differentiation, support for longer-term investments, and for city-led programs. This is something that we participate in as well, and we're happy to be the supplier to the city of Boston, having started that service last December. If we go to the next slide, I won't spend much time on it, but competition also exists in the natural gas space. There's actually more states that permit retail competition behind the local distribution company Citygate in natural gas than exists for electricity. And some of them candidly might surprise you. Georgia has one of the strongest markets for natural gas shopping with a high rate of customer switching. It also allows suppliers to directly bill customers so that retailers own the brand relationship and have greater visibility in the market. And also, ironically, I think Texas has the opposite of what Georgia does for gas. Texas is fully monopolized for natural gas. You can only receive your retail gas supply from the incumbent utility, unlike electricity, where, as we've talked about, shopping is virtually ubiquitous. It's important to note that unlike electricity, there is sort of a national policy for gas in terms of restructuring. All pipeline capacity is unbundled and open to transportation shippers. So if you're a C&I customer directly connecting to an interstate pipeline, you have a choice in the marketer that provides you gas. And that's not the case in electricity, where certificated service territories at the retail level continue to exist in many states. So even where, apart from Hawaii, where there is no interstate pipeline system, if you're directly connecting to a pipeline, you do have customer choice in the gas space. And if we go to the next slide, these are just some of the pros and cons of what retail shopping can offer to customers. The products, they can choose between different products, contracts, prices, and add-ons. I was exploring Maryland's shopping website earlier today and found a plan that allows me to lock in my electricity rates for 5 years at 9.9 cents, which is below the price the utility currently charges me. And by comparison to those long-term plans, a utility price in the restructured states will typically change 2 to 3 times a year. For states that have no retail competition and remain monopolies, you often see electricity rates changing every month with the layering on of trackers and adjustment clauses for fuel and purchase power costs. There's also, on the innovation side, a lot of value in not having to go through a utility commission rate case. No offense to Commissioner Suchman, whenever you want to introduce a product to market. We've recently seen products that integrate home energy storage batteries and electric vehicles into retail plans, allowing those devices to be compensated for discharge when prevailing prices are high at the wholesale market and pay for consumption when prices are very low. These competitive retail plans have also been a conduit for a lot of growth in renewables. NRG last year had plans that sold about 36 million renewable energy certificates through them. That equates to about 13,000 megawatts of renewable electricity. Half of that is for compliance with state portfolio standards, but half of it is voluntary, customers choosing to buy one of our plans that offers a greater share of renewable content relative to the state standard that was passed. So that's retail shopping. I'm going to very lightly hit on the other 2 buckets before turning it over. If we go to the next slide and the one after that, these are the slides about aggregation that Allison will get on, and just giving you another map for fullness. This is where FERC has allowed and states have permitted aggregations of demand response. So states in green represent either full or limited opening for demand response aggregation. Meanwhile, states in light red have no RTOs in which demand response can be bidded, and states in the darker red have exercised what is in essence a FERC-permitted veto over the participation of retail demand response in the wholesale markets. On the next slide, These are aggregations of distributed energy resources that will be permitted under Order 2222. Jessica, if we can go to the next slide. There we go. So the slide before was demand response. This one would apply to rooftop solar and batteries and other resources. States are all over the map in how RTOs, I should say, are all over the map in terms of their compliance timeline for Order 2222. But I feel confident that when these policies are finally enacted, you'll see a much more vibrant customer resource participation level in the RTOs. Again, this doesn't apply to non-RTO states. And then finally, the next slide on aggregations. These are aggregations that participate through retail utility programs, so not in the wholesale market, but in programs that usually vertically integrated utilities have stood up, and customers can participate in aggregations that then sell their services to the incumbent utility. And the final bucket is really about utility rates and tariffs. If we go to the next slide and then the one after that. There's been huge advances in deploying smart meters across the United States over the last 15 years. AMI is becoming quickly ubiquitous. We're at a penetration rate nationwide that now exceeds 70% and en route really to being 90, 100% by the end of this decade. But despite having these smart meters, we're mostly still operating in a framework of pretty dumb rates, flat rates, that don't distinguish between the costs of electricity in 1 hour versus any other, or one season versus any other. But there are some states that have adopted time of use rates as an opt-out. In other words, all residential customers are taking service under a time of use rate unless they have actively chosen to take service under another. This is pretty important in terms of giving customers a nudge, because when we've seen time of use rates adopted only as an opt-in basis, we see very low enrollments. To just give an example, one Pennsylvania utility had only about 100 customers out of 2 million meters enrolled in time of use rates, whereas California, for example, has approached a point of ubiquity for customer enrollment and participation in time of use rates. We also see some experiments with truly dynamic pricing, where all or part of a customer's demand is billed under real-time wholesale prices. That's permitted in Illinois as an opt-in, New Hampshire Electric Cooperative as an opt-in, and California has an active proceeding in it. But it's worth pointing out that academic research has found that well-designed time of use captures about 3/4 of the value of a real-time price dynamic plan. And my final slide to just share with you is about some experimentation regulated utilities have done, offering different tariffs that permit customers a limited degree of choice. If we go to that slide, Jessica. So I've just given 3 examples. One of these is a subscription-based concept that California is experimenting with, where a customer can purchase a particular load shape from their utility. In other words, the amount of energy they would expect to use over a particular day based on their historic usage. And then they're exposed to wholesale pricing at the margin in order to gain the value of decremental or incremental usage at their home or business, even while they're protected and hedged against that wholesale price for the vast majority of their use. So trying to ensure rate stability, but also compensation for customer devices that they may choose to adopt. The second one, going in maybe almost the opposite direction, is a truly flat bill. This is a program out of Georgia Power that allows people who enroll in the product to receive a single bill at a single cost that does not change any month of the year. It doesn't true up, unlike budget billing. You just get a flat bill with no surprises for the course of an entire year. And then finally, even in places that have no retail competition to speak of, some utilities, and we're seeing this in particular with the growth in data centers and AI, are allowing customers to bring their own energy to the table with them and pass it through a utility tariff. So you'll have a third-party generation service provider. They'll enter into a bilateral contract with you, and then the utility tariff will acknowledge that purchase. And instead of being billed the utility's tariff rate for supply, you'll pay whatever you and the generation service provider have agreed to. That helps alleviate resource adequacy concerns and make sure that large commercial and industrial customers are directly contributing to new energy production in places where they're locating. And the tariff page I pulled from there is from Arizona Public Service. With that, it's been great talking to you. I look forward to questions. And Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Travis, and thank you, Nayruk and Commissioner Suchman. My name is Allison Bates-Wanup. I am an energy regulatory attorney who has worked across the U.S. On regulatory issues in all 9 U.S. and Canadian RTOs in about a dozen states, as well as before FERC. And today I am here on behalf of the DER Task Force, which I will begin by introducing you all to in case you're not familiar. So the DER Task Force is a community of DER enthusiasts, although we're also open to just the DER curious. And we are an independently operating and independently funded organization. So critical to my remarks today, what I am saying is not being said on behalf of any single company, technology, or business model. And like I said, we are a community. We generate a lot of content that I would welcome you all to get involved in. We have a podcast, a Substack that you can follow, and I invite you all via the link that I have included here to join our 2,000 plus member Slack workspace, where you can be connected with people from across the energy space, including academics, utilities, engineers, and of course, people from industry. I would love to have more regulators there, so please, I hope you join. And I'm also open to giving you a Slack tutorial as somebody who didn't learn Slack until my late 30s. There's a lot of great content on there. We have things like discussion sessions for the Brattle VPP report, as well as meet and greets with people from industry explaining their business. So I welcome you all to join, and we can go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you. So while there is a lot of hype about VPPs right now, I do want to take a moment to emphasize that we at the DER Task Force believe that DERs are so much more than VPPs, that they are not just synonyms. They can be a form of reliability and resilience for communities through microgrids. They can provide non-wires alternatives. And then, of course, to turn DERs into VPPs, you need really good policies, like some of which we are going to discuss today. But now I will turn to VPPs on the next slide. Thank you. So I'm sure that you have all heard of the phrase VPP and have probably heard the definition. There can be murkiness with how people use it, so I just always like to clarify the way that I am defining this term. So I define it as DERs dispatched together to serve the grid. This is a simplified version of the DOE's definition. This includes load flexibility and managed charging, which again tracks what I see DOE and Nayruk using to define VPPs in their programming. I don't include certain other things that sometimes people characterize as a VPP, and that is, again, my position. We may go to the next slide. Thanks. I'm getting over a cold, so hopefully I don't start coughing. So aggregators, which Travis was talking about before, are a critical component to enabling customer options across all of the retail electric supply regimes. Now, aggregators manage multiple DERs to provide grid services, and while they are generally thought of as a third-party company like NRG, they include retail suppliers or even the utility. Now, while there are more customer options in restructured territories where aggregators can operate independently from the load serving entity for direct participation in the wholesale market, and customers also have retailers, there's still customer options in the other territories. So a lot of people are not always familiar with the concept that even in vertically integrated states in an RTO, an aggregator can operate within that state. And while the customers load obligation stays with the incumbent utility, the aggregator can peel off certain DERs for direct participation in the wholesale market. Currently, that end response, but as 2222 is implemented, which Travis talked about earlier, that will expand to other DERs. So again, I think it's important to emphasize that in vertically integrated states, non-utility aggregators operate today. Those states include Oklahoma, Kansas, and West Virginia, as well as 2 states, Michigan and Missouri, that recently lifted their prohibitions on third-party aggregators contracting directly with customers for participation in wholesale markets. And then if we move over to vertically integrated regions where there is not an RTO, aggregators can still engage with utilities as partners. And obviously the utility may elect on its own to act as an aggregator and use DERs to provide grid services. And so while there are some differences in the options across the different constructs, one thing I do want to emphasize is that utility and aggregator partnerships are actually pretty common across all of these constructs. So there might be more lessons learned that can be shared across regimes than one might think just based on looking at your retail electric supply paradigm. So we can go to the next slide now, which does kind of double click on if you are in an RTO region, but don't worry, what I'm talking about on the last slide applies to everybody. So where there is an RTO, it's important to understand how the retail and wholesale programs mesh together, because oftentimes there are misconceptions about this. So while they are traditionally thought of as competitors, in fact, retail and wholesale programs often operate together as complements, both for individual customers and the market. And this alludes to something that Commissioner Suchman said in her intro. So why is it that these two complement each other rather than just constantly beat each other out all the time? So the first reason is that retail programs generally pay more than wholesale programs, significantly more in some cases. It might be 4 to 15 times more revenue for a customer in a retail program. I have 2 examples here. In MISO, which is almost entirely vertically integrated states, utility demand response interruptible rate programs will pay customers between 30,000 to 75,000 a megawatt year, which is 15 to 30 times more what a customer might make in the wholesale market in MISO for capacity in a given year. Similarly, looking at Massachusetts, the Connected program, which is administered by the incumbent utilities, pays almost 10 times as much what a battery resource could obtain in the wholesale market. So what this means is that in an apples to apples comparison, customers will often opt for the retail program. And that means that retail design, even in restructured territories, is a critical component of enabling DERs to provide grid services that benefit customers and giving them a choice and benefit all ratepayers in reducing costs. The other ways in which aggregators or wholesale participation can complement retail program is both the ways in which aggregators can fill in the gaps in the market, both for individual customers as well as the actual marketplace. So to talk first of individual customers, customers can stack, a term that many of you have likely heard before. So an example would be a customer participating in their utilities retail capacity program, as well as an aggregator's wholesale market energy or ancillary service program. When a customer can be enrolled in multiple programs, I call that complementary participation to distinguish that from the instances where there is a risk of impermissible double compensation. And I analogize this type of of complementary participation as having a weekday 9 to 5 job and a weekend side hustle. The DER can earn different money from different programs at different times doing different services. But aggregators also critically fill in gaps in the market. They might serve customers who are ineligible for a utilities program. Sometimes these programs have, say, 1 megawatt size limits that exclude a lot of resources from the market. Aggregators can work with customers to make customized products that fit the way that consumer uses energy and, again, their size. But they can also develop innovative services that the market then really needs. An example is the company that I used to work at, Voltus, hired engineers away from tech companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook to develop its ancillary service product for wholesale markets that can bring resources as small as 10 kilowatts into the market. As a comparison, the only utility program I have seen doing ancillary service wholesale market participation was DTE in Michigan that required 10 megawatts as a minimum. So 10 kilowatts versus 10 megawatts is quite a difference. So if you want to enable customer choice and you don't want to design a billion tariffs, aggregators are a great option regardless of market constructs. And one of the big trends I am seeing in designing retail programs is in BYOD battery programs, which I'm going to discuss on my last slide. And I hope that my dog doesn't start barking. So could we go to the last slide? Thank you. So I would guess over the next 2 to 3 years, there is going to be a huge uptake in the number of BYOD battery programs. And I have pulled information on 4 from different retail electric supply regimes across the country. So I have Connected Solutions, which is Massachusetts. It is restructured and in an RTO. Green Mountain Power in my home state, but not my electric service territory in Vermont, which is vertically integrated, but in an RTO. And then from 2 vertically integrated non-RTO utilities, Rocky Mountain Power's program, this is out of Utah, and then the Duke Power Pair program, which was just approved recently. And so what you can see here is a lot of variety. There's different funding sources. They have different incentives. Connected Solutions goes with a pay for performance model per kilowatt, 275 kilowatts, while the others have an upfront rebate, with Rocky Mountain Power and Duke also including a small performance or reservation payment, if you will. They have a lot of disparity in their dispatches. They're generally solving for peak shaving, but that seems like if you look at the Rocky Mountain program, they're dispatching these batteries daily for peaks and frequency response. So I think that there is a lot that utilities can learn from each other in designing these kind of programs. There's no reason why I say places in RTO regions couldn't be dispatching these resources for daily peaks as well. So I think that over the next few years, we're going to see a lot more incumbent utilities leading the charge on these battery programs. So that is my discussion of some of the flavors of consumer choice, and I'm going to kick it to Aaron.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. I think that's a good virtual baton pass as well on trying to embark on this future with BYOD, in particular batteries. So I will touch on some of that. So my name is Aaron August. I am the Chief Customer and Transformation Officer at PSE. Thanks to Nayruk and Commissioner Suchman for helping facilitate today's dialogue. If you could just go to the next slide here, and I'll jump into 4 parts. There's a bit of a backdrop of who is PSE, who we are, where we've been. I'll do a top-line look at some of the different challenges and opportunities within the customer choice domain, and then where we're headed with customers as a backdrop. So if you're not familiar with PSE, we are Washington State's largest investor-owned utility. serve about 1.2 million electric customers and 900,000 natural gas customers, primarily in Western Washington. We're also Washington's oldest utility. As you can see, for over 150 years, we have helped provide the growth of our local communities in what I think is one of the most innovative regions in the world. And as we start to look at innovation, more and more every single day, every facet of modern life depends on affordable, safe, reliable power, and that's only going to grow. While at the same time, we've got this climate crisis in front of us, and we've got to account for the variety of needs that our customers and our planet needs, because we just candidly can't wait. And so PSE is at the forefront of this clean energy transition. We're undergoing the most significant transformation in our history as a company in support of some of the most, as I said, ambitious state clean energy laws that you'll see throughout the country. So just real quick, I'll say some more Washington state context. We are not a part of an RTO or ISO, and we have been traditionally blessed with excess capacity and an abundance of hydro. But as that starts to get absorbed by the growing implementation and execution of intermittent resources, capacity and reliability are certainly on tops of minds for customers and utilities throughout the state, but in particular PSE. So that'll be kind of a footnote throughout the discussion as well. So if you could, let's go to the next slide, and I'll take a quick flyover of what I think are the four most prominent areas of climate policy within the state. And so the first one, CETA, stands for Clean Energy Transformation Act. This was passed in 2019. CETA commits Washington to phasing out coal by 2025, be a carbon neutral electricity supplier by 2030, and 100% clean by 2045. There's specific requirements throughout CETA that really are tucked around ensuring customer benefit from the transition and equitable transition, and really making sure we're positioning investments for the clean energy system of the future. There's the CCA, so the Climate Commitment Act. This was passed in 2021. The CCA establishes a pretty comprehensive program to reduce carbon pollution and achieve the state's greenhouse gas limits that are set in state law. Then there's the Clean Fuel Standard. This was passed in 2021. This is going to curb pollution from the transportation sector, which accounts, as we know, for about 45% of emissions, and it's 45% in Washington. This legislation directs what is called the Department of Ecology to adopt rules to limit the aggregation and overall greenhouse gas emissions per unit of transportation fuel. So CFS is established in other places like California, and so Washington is quickly behind that. And then the last one here is called the Clean Buildings Act. That was passed in 2019. That legislation adopts a new energy performance standard for existing commercial buildings greater than 50,000 square feet, and it provides incentives to encourage energy efficiency, really with the objective to increase efficiency of the state's existing buildings, thereby lowering the cost and reducing emissions into the future. So again, these four pieces of policy are amidst some of the most ambitious in the country and things that we're all actively working on. If you go to the next slide, you can take a quick peek at where we've been. And so kind of dating back into the 90s, we had kind of embarked on net metering, retail wheeling, and transportation services. In the next decade, we jumped into time of use rates, which we started and stopped and picked back up again last year, introducing time varying rates once more. And I think Travis's comments got into a little bit of the, how prices can help support the shaping and shifting of demand. We then got into green power rate alternatives, became really a leader across the country around this program, going down the path of solar and helping communities participate more, and government customers in particular, to purchase 100% of their energy from dedicated local renewable resources. We got into voluntary RNG and community solar. And then last, and really probably where I'll spend a bit more of time, is this concept of energy orchestration. And it pairs nicely with Allison's comments around DERs, a VPP framework, and how we can start to utilize all of these connected devices into the future in more of a crowdsourced way, or like an orchestra, pun intended there. So let's jump into first the challenges and opportunities, and really start to look through the lens of CETA to help illustrate some of that. So if you could jump to the next slide. This path that we're on, as I said, it not only is it ambitious, it's representing a scale and pace that is quite, I'd say, unprecedented. And there's a couple of footnotes I'll get into in the next slide that talk about what we have to acquire to be able to reach some of these targets. Doing this, there's also increasing demand. So this is going to increasingly and significantly change the policy around it. And so from Travis's comments to Allison's, I'd say the regulatory landscape is also going to be going through significant change as customers of when and how they use energy is going to start to significantly change. The volume of clean energy technology that is coming online is coming at us quickly, and much of it is not commercially available yet. And so we're looking at how we can start to pull in that thinking, look at the horizon, and see where we can evolve our programs, be it customer incentives or rebates, or kind of a pay-for-performance programs and design, to really pull that in while at the same time customers are adopting them at the same time. The grid itself needs to be expanded and modernized to support this transition, and we've talked in different forums around the sheer capacity required when you look at new pieces of technology being plugged into the grid. Impact of AI is a really good example of that. And then I'd say lastly is this affordability and equity. How do we do this in a way that we can accelerate transformation, but it's got to be optimized for equitable integration? And so those are kind of the top line challenges that we're looking at. I do want to take a double click into just that pace and scale of what PSE needs to acquire. So if you can jump to the next slide, I've got a graphic here that helps us really start to frame some of this. So for context, PSE's current owned and contracted generating capacity is right around 6,500 megawatts of nameplate capacity. In order for us to meet CETA requirements, to be carbon neutral, it's going to necessitate us getting new renewable and non-emitting resources of another 6,700 megawatts by 2030. So to kind of pause on that, that means PSE is going to need to acquire more of this type of resource than it's ever had in its 150-year history. So we're going to have to double the current generating capacity over the next 6 years. And then when you look out over the next 15, in order for us to get to this 2045 target, we've got this 15,000 megawatt marker of new renewable and non-emitting resources. And so the stack here of what's required when you start to pull in the different pieces of infrastructure, we've done some scaling, and again, this is just one example, but that's 700,000 residential solar panel systems with 50,000 battery storage systems plugged in, peaking plants, over 1,200 wind turbines, 4,500 solar or 45 solar plants, hybrid generation and storage plants, 10 battery storage plants, and then over a gigawatt of savings from energy efficiency, conservation, and demand response. So if there's any one slide amidst consumer choice, I mean, it's on the right-hand side, the volume of what is required for our customers, for us to actually deliver for our customers, we're at this tipping point of this is a with and for customer moment. And so our aim is to be our customers' clean energy partner of choice, because we do see this as being the era of less centralized power, more distributed, and more distributed throughout our 6,000 square mile service territory. It's upon us, and we're actively pursuing that plan. So again, the pace and scale of what's required is kind of, I'll say, challenge number one, but inside of it, a really great opportunity for PSE to really define itself. The next slide gets into it's being a dual commodity provider. We also have to work through keeping in mind the role of the natural gas system. And so a really good example is, and we're a winter peaking utility. This past January, there was a cold snap that impacted large parts of the country, including Washington State. And for 6 days, extreme cold drove unprecedented demand for energy on both the electric and natural gas system. We set new highs for natural gas use during that period. And we have 2 facilities, the Jackson Prairie Natural Gas Storage Facility and our Tacoma LNG facility, both played a crucial role in ensuring that we could keep our customers warm in the cold and on for hundreds of thousands of the customers that required it. And so as we think about this clean energy transition, it's on a cold winter day, the gas system provides twice as much energy as the electric system. And so then there's that kind of variable into the equation of how we intend to transform. And so it's another kind of must do in looking at how we can position our system for the best investments in support of the energy system of the future. And so as I jump into the next slide, how we see this all coming together, I mentioned customers. So customers are going to play a pivotal role. The why behind all of this is really getting us to this place of creating flexibility, visibility, control, automation, and growth through our programs, and really working with our customers to get there. As you move into the how we intend to do this is really threefold. There's emerging partnerships. So there's just and to Allison's comments on storage, DERs, just the volume of connected devices to the grid. There is a whole sea of really wonderful partners out there that I think utilities are and should continue to work with to see how we can shape our rebates and incentives and create programs that really make sense for customers, doing that clean energy technology exploration, and then figuring out how we can not only enable these programs, but optimize them to really harness that full potential. For PSE, we are looking at customer journeys. I think customer experience is going to be the core differentiator of where we go from here. And I've got a final slide I'll get to here in a moment that kind of speaks to that. But the 1, 2, and 3 of the how have got to be informed by customer journeys. That allows us to evolve from this place of being reactively event-based for climate-driven events to where we can actually, and again, as an orchestra, be playing in the background the shaping and shifting of demand curves through comprehensive load management, and then stacking the value of all of the different programs that a utility can offer. And so then the what is those programs, whether it's energy efficiency, demand response, distributed renewable generation, storage and EVs, and we call those out all as separate kind of choice buckets for customers. The idea would be driving the adoption of those technologies, then creating programs that enable them to be enrolled, and then optimizing how those programs all work in support of the grid, in support of our customers. And then again, the 6 primary drivers along the bottom that I think are kind of the force multiplier here of driving our thinking of consumer choice is, whether it's technology and climate to policy to market forces within the energy ecosystem landscape. But I think the one on the right there on its own is equity. We have got to work through doing this in an equitable way, or else there'll be this energy poverty gap that already exists that will only get wider. So program design that considers equity at the beginning is also a really critical component. And so jumping to the next to last slide here, I would just say, customer centricity has not necessarily been what the utility industry was founded upon. I mean, if you just jump into the lexicon of utility speak, in the beginning, it wasn't customers, it was a meter. And then from meters, it shifted to ratepayer, both not at all what it is we need to be thinking about our customers. I think you fast forward to current date, you've got more utilities thinking of customers as customers. Like, how do we engage them, work with them, educate them on programs and services that create value? I think getting more utilities down the space of personas. So it's not just a small, medium business customer, residential customer, large C&I customer. There are personas. What in the community, what types of choices are communities making? So it's kind of that double, triple click into who are our customers. And that gets you to this place of becoming their partner and earning the right to partner with customers to really help shift how and when we use energy for decades to come. And so this takes me to my last slide here, really just growing this journey, right? And so in order for us to actually be our customer's partner of choice, we need to provide optionality and compelling programs that have a clear value statement, and more importantly, have clear value showing up on their bill, that enable them to participate, which helps us unlock new ways to serve, harnessing the full potential of whether it's electric vehicles and batteries, but just again, the connected devices that are showing up in our lives more and more every day, and then enabling all of this as one together in support of this clean energy future that we're trying to adopt and create. So that's the end of my remarks. I think that gives us just enough time. So I think I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Suchman for any questions.
Well, this was terrifically informative for me. So thank you very much, Travis and Allison and Aaron. I actually wanted to ask you, I mean, the point of these presentations was about consumer choice, and that assumes an active participant as opposed to a passive participant. You know, you come home, you turn on your lights, you're not really engaged in electricity, as opposed to going to the grocery store where you're much more active. So in order for these programs to be effective, you're going to need to have consumer engagement. And so I wanted to ask each of you if you can talk a little bit about what you see as sort of necessary roles that you have in sort of in reaching out, and perhaps roles that the regulator has in trying to get ratepayers more engaged in being part of the solution. So why don't we'll start with Travis and Allison, and then Aaron, so we'll just sort of follow the same sequence we did before.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, first, very directly in response, I mean, I think it is regulators' role to make sure customers are faced with shopping opportunities and options. I mean, there's a lot of inattentiveness in all of the markets that feature kind of low visibility, low salience products like energy, insurance, things like that. And oftentimes government has decided to try to break through that by creating more active shopping environments. And the example that I mentioned, which I think warrants some attention by regulators, some academic attention, of the city of Lubbock managing to get 2/3 of its customers to make an active choice in retail supplier in a 6-week period, is just an amazing data point. They did that in 6 weeks when many Eastern restructured markets, you know, never have had that level of customer engagement and switching in retail competition. So I'd say that's the big one. The other one that I'd say is if you can't expect customers to, you know, every day come home and, you know, actively turn things off and on and switches going every which way, then you need to have more automation within the system. And you need retailers and aggregators and utilities that, with customer consent, are able to actually flex the demand of devices within the parameters customers have specified for them. And I'd note in that regard, the California Energy Commission has established appliance standards so that every major appliance ultimately in the state of California ultimately has hardwired in demand responsive features that can interact with utility and retailer price signals that are sent to that device. So they're skating toward a landscape where they're trying to make sure that all of these possible virtual power plants of the future are actually technologically enabled for that level of automation so that they can depend upon that capacity as people continue to replace and install new appliances.
Okay, Allison?
I'll go next. So I'll start off by saying, yes, I agree with everything that Travis just said, and I do agree that regulators play the role, but I like to think even bigger than that. A month ago, I was at my children's school, and I asked a bunch of 5th and 6th graders where Vermont gets the majority of its power from, and they all said Hydro-Quebec. So what people know about this now is very different from what they knew 10 years ago and what they will know in 10 years. And I do think that private companies with a financial incentive can be great tools for consumer education because they can have those kitchen table conversations. But I also just think there's a balance, and every state will find a different one. You know, a lot of people just do want to call up their utility to get a heat pump installed, and as long as that's okay with regulators, that can make a more frictionless market and get more resources deployed.
Okay,
When I was
Aaron?
Yeah, and I'll jump in and I'll say +1 to the comments, but I think there's this whole kind of next generation energy education conversations that have to happen. I mean, our industry is terribly complex, and I think it's only going to start to multiply. And so I think as much as we can begin to educate and help customers adopt these technologies, and then at the same time, you've got programs that again, have a very obvious and kind of seamless way to bolt into their lives. Because I think, as Travis said, that people aren't going to want to, I don't think a customer is going to want to come and kind of mine the switch every day. But if you've got a system in the background that's doing it for you, and then there's some value there on your utility bill, I think that becomes an opportunity again to help customers see that investing in clean energy technology actually carries a kind of a two-way win-win outcome for both themselves and I'll say the grid at large.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a follow-up. So I very much love new technology, but new technology comes at a price, and I'm also very mindful of trying to keep rates affordable. And in Maryland, a third of our ratepayers are low and moderate income, so we have to be mindful of the rates that they pay. Travis, and I think Aaron, you also mentioned smart meters, and so I wanted to ask: are there technologies that we have now that we're not fully utilizing? So smart meters have TOU opportunities, but what else can we do with those smart meters, and what other sort of technologies that are sort of in place now that we're not fully utilizing?
Yeah, on the smart meter side, I mean, your state has done excellent work studying how customers perform under time of use rates, and has found that at least in certain utility service territories, you get double-digit percentage reductions in demand across the population enrolled in an economically efficient time of use rate, and that holds up even for low to moderate income customer bases. So it's in some ways more fair and more equitable than targeted subsidization of devices that are likely to be adopted more by the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum, I would say. I think time of use rates are kind of leveling in that way, and really significantly needed in a lot of these markets. And then as to the question of subsidizing particular technologies, there are in the restructured markets a lot of work to be done. That VPPs that are funded through utility programs are not just that they're able to fully stack their value. So the smart thermostat programs of Connected Solutions and in Maryland and in ComEd's AC Cycling in Illinois are all good examples where the utility pays money to consumers to adopt smart thermostats, but then they're only used for distribution level purposes and peak shaving. And those devices are invisible to retailers like me, who might want to use them incrementally to help customers avoid additional energy costs as well. So, we talk a lot about adopting VPPs, but sadly, there's a lot of VPP capacity that's actually sitting idle right now as a result of being funded by those utility programs, but not being optimized by all of the different actors that participate in these restructured markets.
Okay, and Allison and Aaron, very quickly, since we're running a little out of time.
No, I agree with everything that Travis said, that I don't think it's a technological barrier. I think that it is an institutional barrier towards trusting these resources and testing them. I don't think trust should be blind. And so we need the cost benefit analysis to actually show that they are cost effective, as well as the test where those needed to show that they are physically effective.
Yeah, and then I would just add that whether it's demonstration pilots or just different ways to actually tangibly test what's possible and to be able to do that quickly, right? And this is where the speed of innovation and pace of regulation have got this natural tension. And so how do we create mechanisms to actually implement some of these things to answer your question, Commissioner, around, if it's whether it's participation or low moderate income customer support. I think there's just a growing domain of technology that's out there, but it can't be an academic exercise. Like, we've got to do it in practice, and we've got to actually make it real for our customers, or else they won't adopt it.
Okay, well, thank you. This is definitely food for thought. I don't know about other people on the call, but it was very informative for me. And Kira, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thanks everyone for joining us today. As Jessica mentioned, we'll put the recording and slides onto NARUC's website early next week, and please join us for next month's webinar. Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.